I caught my girlfriend, Jessica, with my best friend, Rob, at a bar, and that was the moment everything fell apart. I walked into my favorite country bar and grill, grabbed a small table in the back corner, and ordered a sandwich, fries, and a beer. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary, just a quiet night to myself. While I was halfway through my meal, I looked up and froze. There was Rob, my closest friend, walking in with Jessica, the woman I thought was my girlfriend. My stomach sank as I replayed what she'd told me earlier. I had invited her to spend the evening with me, but she claimed she had plans with some friends and suggested we meet tomorrow instead. And now, here she was holding hands with him. Jessica and I had been seeing each other for 6 months. I really thought we were building something real. We spent nearly every weekend together, and she'd even mentioned how much she loved the time we shared. We'd started talking about the future, tossing around the idea of getting engaged someday, though we didn't feel the need to rush into it. All of that now felt like a cruel joke. As I sat there, stunned, someone turned on the jukebox and Patsy Cline's Crazy started playing. I couldn't help but focus on the lyrics. Crazy for thinking that my love could hold you. It was as if the song was mocking me. I watched Jessica and Rob laugh, leaning into each other like a couple who didn't have a care in the world. It hit me harder than I expected because Rob knew how much Jessica meant to me. Some bro code he had. By the time the chorus of the song played, crazy for trying, crazy for crying, I couldn't sit still any longer. I stood up, walked across the room, and stopped in front of their table. Rob opened his mouth to say something, but I cut him off. "Don't," I said sharply. "Rob, if I ever see you again, one of us is going to end up in the hospital." I turned to Jessica, who looked like she was about to cry. "And you," I added, my voice cold. "We're done. You've shown me exactly who you are." Without waiting for either of them to respond, I walked out of the bar. The anger boiled inside me, but I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of seeing me lose my cool. The next day, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. It was Jessica, but I wasn't in the mood to talk. Later, Rob called. Against my better judgment, I picked up. "What do you want, Rob?" I said, my tone sharp. "Ethan, I'm sorry," he began. "You know, I've always thought Jessica was attractive. We got to talking at work, and well, one thing led to another. I asked her out, and she said yes." "You knew she was with me," I spat back. "And you asked her out anyway? How many times, Rob? How many times have you been with her?" There was a long pause before he admitted, 3 times. "We've been together 3 times. It just happened. I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't cut it," I said, my voice ice cold. "What about Megan? Does she know you've been cheating on her? She deserves better than you." Silence. "Don't ever call me again, Rob," I said before hanging up. Megan, his girlfriend, worked with all 3 of us at the plant. She was one of the nicest people I knew, and it broke my heart to think about how this would destroy her. Later that evening, Jessica called again. I figured it was time to put an end to it. "What do you want, Jessica?" I asked. "Ethan, I just want to say I'm sorry," she began. "Rob asked me out several times, and I finally said yes. It didn't mean anything." "Cut the crap," I snapped. "Rob told me you 2 were together at least 3 times. Let me guess, it's probably more than that. Was it the money? Was that what did it? Well, good luck with that. You and Rob deserve each other." She started to respond, but I cut her off. "The only person I feel sorry for is Megan. She trusted both of you, and you threw that away. Stay out of my life, Jessica, and stop calling." I hung up and let out a deep breath. The betrayal stung, but at least I had made my position clear. Thinking back, I couldn't believe how I'd ended up here. Growing up in Ohio, I'd been raised in a working-class family. My dad was a coal miner, and my mom always made sure we knew the value of hard work. She'd also taught me to respect women, telling me to treat them the way I'd want my own sisters treated. I wasn't the most outgoing kid, but I had big dreams. I wanted to be a mechanical engineer, and when I got a scholarship, it felt like a miracle. College wasn't easy for me. I was reserved, and making friends didn't come naturally. But then I met Lucas, a business major who seemed to know everyone. He was charismatic, confident, and had a knack for getting people to open up. Lucas and I became fast friends, and when I wasn't focused on football or my studies, we hit up parties together. He had a way of drawing people in, especially women, and I probably wouldn't have talked to half the girls I did if it weren't for him. After graduation, I stayed in Ohio and landed a job at a Ford plant. The pay was solid, and I was able to afford a decent apartment and a used truck. I even sent money home to my parents each month to help out. Life felt steady, if not exciting. Lucas ended up in the same city, working as a manager at a warehouse that supplied parts to the plant. We stayed close, hanging out on weekends, and it wasn't long before he introduced me to his girlfriend, Megan. She was smart, kind, and had this effortless charm. I could see why Lucas was so taken with her. If I'm being honest, there were moments I wished I had met her first. But Lucas and I had an unspoken rule. Friends don't mess with each other's relationships. Now, looking at the wreckage of my own love life, I couldn't help but feel sorry for Megan. She didn't deserve any of this. I had always stuck to an unspoken code with my friends, especially Mike. No matter how tempting, I didn't date anyone he was involved with. Sure, I went on a few casual outings with women from my plant, but it was strictly platonic. Double dates with Mike and Sarah, though, were another story. Being around Sarah stirred something in me, but I buried those feelings deep. She was always kind to me, and that just made it harder. One day, Mike invited me to their plant's Christmas party. Their company supplied parts to ours, and I figured it wouldn't hurt to go. That's when I met Jessica. She was a knockout, curves in all the right places in a style that turned heads. Unlike Sarah, who was more reserved, Jessica had a bold and flirtatious nature. She worked as a secretary for one of the managers at Mike's plant, and we hit it off immediately. Jessica and I spent the whole night dancing and chatting. By the end of the evening, we decided to meet up again. For New Year's Eve, Mike and Sarah joined us for a double date. Sarah said she was happy I'd found someone, but I could tell there was something off in her tone. It wasn't exactly jealousy, but it wasn't wholehearted support either. That night, after the festivities, Jessica came back to my place. Let's just say she left quite the impression. The next morning, Jessica seemed a little surprised by my modest apartment. I explained that my job was still relatively new and that I didn't need much right now since I was helping my family back home. I assured her that I'd eventually work on building a more comfortable life, but for now, I was focused on the basics. Then she asked about Mike's background. "Is it true his family's loaded?" she inquired casually. I confirmed that Mike's parents had funded his college education, though he wasn't exactly living like a trust fund kid. Our relationship moved quickly after that. We spent nearly every weekend together, going out to eat, catching movies, and just enjoying each other's company. I was starting to fall hard for Jessica, and she seemed to feel the same way. But as time went on, a few things started to nag at me. Her constant flirting with other guys and her obsession with material things didn't sit well with me. I'd often reassure her, telling her that we could build a great life together. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, especially on those double dates with Mike and Sarah. There was a weird tension I couldn't quite put my finger on. Jessica and I had been together for about 6 months when I decided to give her a token of my feelings. While we were at a county fair, I bought her a small friendship ring from a jewelry booth. It wasn't much, but I told her it symbolized that she was mine until she felt ready for something more serious, like an engagement. She smiled brightly as she slipped it on, and for a moment, I thought everything was perfect. I was also working on myself during this time, hitting the gym 3 times a week. I managed to get down to 230 pounds and felt better about how I looked. But then came that fateful night at the Country Bar and Grill. Seeing Jessica and Rob together, locking lips no less, was a gut punch I wasn't prepared for. After confronting them and having those painful follow-up conversations, I cut all ties with both of them. As angry as I was, I couldn't help but feel bad for Sarah. She didn't deserve any of this. A couple of weeks later, my phone rang. It was Sarah. "Ethan, I'm so sorry about what happened with Jessica," she said. "I had a feeling she might mess up, but I never thought it would be with Rob." "Wait, Sarah, are you saying there might have been others?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. "Well," she hesitated, "I saw her having lunch with her boss, Brad, a few times. It could have been innocent, but it seemed like a regular thing. I thought about telling you, but I didn't want to hurt you if I was wrong. And then I found out about her and Rob. That's when I cut ties with both of them. Thanks for letting me know, Sarah. I've been worried about you through all of this. You're one of my closest friends. Maybe we should catch up sometime." "I'd like that, Ethan," she replied softly. "Take care." After our conversation, I wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or more burdened. A few more weeks passed, and one evening while I was picking up groceries, I ran into Sarah at the supermarket. "Hey, Ethan," she greeted me with a warm smile. "Good to see you. How have you been?" "Not bad," I replied. "And you? Back in the dating scene yet?" She smiled again. "I've turned down a few offers because, well, I've got my sights set on someone special. I don't want to ruin things if he decides to call." I chuckled nervously. "Oh, sorry to hear that. Actually, I was going to ask if you'd like to." "Yes," she interrupted, her eyes lighting up. "I'd love to go out with you." "You're the one I was hoping would ask." Caught off guard but thrilled, I asked, "How about Saturday? We could hit up my favorite country bar and grill." "Sounds perfect," she said. "What time? And what should I wear?" "I'll pick you up at 6. Just wear something comfortable." When Saturday came, I arrived at her place right on time. Sarah stepped out in a Western-style outfit. Jeans, a vest, a cowgirl hat, and boots. She looked incredible. I opened the truck door for her, and she climbed in with a big smile. The bar had a live country band scheduled for later that night, but we had about an hour to chat before the music started. Over beers, we discovered just how much we had in common. Sarah told me she was originally from Kentucky, just a county over from where I grew up. She'd gone to college there before moving to Ohio for work. Talking to her felt easy, natural, like it was meant to happen all along. We placed our food orders, and I opted for a hearty double bacon cheeseburger with fries, while Sarah chose a Reuben sandwich. We decided to share the fries, which felt oddly intimate, like we were reconnecting on some unspoken level. At one point, she asked if this was the same bar where I had caught Mike and Emily together. I confirmed it was, but I assured her that no couple of cheaters could ruin my favorite hangout spot. She just smiled, a soft, knowing kind of smile. As the band kicked off their set, they began with a couple of slow songs to get the couples out on the dance floor. It was all classic hits, the kind that tugged at your heartstrings and had everyone swaying in unison. Sarah and I joined in, and for those moments, it felt like the rest of the world faded away. When the pace picked up with some fast-tempo tunes, we returned to our table. I admitted I wasn't much into fast dancing, but told her I enjoyed watching the women move. She laughed at that, her eyes sparkling mischievously. The band played a couple of Roy Orbison classics. His music always struck a chord with me. Then, they switched over to some Loretta Lynn tunes. We hit the floor again for the slower ones, letting the music guide us. At one point, the announcer invited all the ladies up for some line dancing, and a few brave guys joined them. I teased Sarah about joining in. "Why not get in there and show them your moves?" I said playfully. "You just want to check out my big OL," but she quipped with a grin before heading up to join the others. She wasn't wrong, though. As she lined up with the women, she turned back to me and gave her hips a cheeky little shake, making me laugh. When the song ended, she came back to the table, her face glowing. I leaned in and kissed her without thinking. Pulling back, I quickly apologized, but she just smiled and said, "I'm not sorry," before kissing me again. The night flew by in a blur of dancing, laughter, and a couple of beers. Before we knew it, the announcer declared the last song of the evening. I pulled Sarah close, and we swayed together to the music, lost in our little bubble. When the song ended, I kissed her one last time before driving her home. At her door, I asked if she'd like to go out again next Saturday, suggesting a trip to Cedar Point, the big amusement park in Ohio. She eagerly agreed, and we exchanged a lingering goodnight kiss. The whole next week at work, I couldn't stop smiling. By Friday, I gave Sarah a call to confirm our plans. She admitted she'd never been to Cedar Point, but had always wanted to go. Saturday morning, I picked her up, and we set off. The drive was filled with easy conversation, and at one point, I asked if she'd mentioned to Mike or Emily that we were seeing each other. She shook her head firmly, saying she hadn't spoken to either of them in a while. At the park, we went on nearly every roller coaster, laughing and screaming like teenagers. We tried out other rides and caught a few shows in between. By the time we left, we were starving, so we stopped at a Texas Roadhouse for dinner. After a long day of thrills and laughs, we were both wiped out by the time I dropped her off. Sarah shared her place with a roommate named Joan, a kind woman in her 50s who worked retail. Sarah said Joan was like family to her, and their bond was comforting. Before saying goodbye, I told Sarah I'd be out of town the next weekend, but couldn't wait to see her again after that. She told me to give her a call when I got back. As we kissed goodnight, I couldn't help but tell her I cared deeply for her. She smiled and said, "I've always liked you too, Ethan." The following week, I reached out to Sarah again. This time, I invited her to a formal dinner my boss was hosting for his wedding anniversary at the Hilton Hotel. I explained that I'd booked a room since there'd be drinking involved and assured her I'd understand if she didn't want to attend. Her response was immediate. "I'd love to go with you, Ethan," she said warmly. Then, with a sly grin, she added, "But we don't need two beds, you know. I want you to know I'm falling for you. Just promise me you'll be honest and never lead me on." "I'd never hurt you, Sarah," I replied earnestly. "And I'll do everything I can to make sure no one else does either. One thing, though," I said, "could we use your car for the event? I'd rather not roll up to a fancy affair in my truck." She laughed. "Of course. I'll let Joan know I won't be home that night." I parked my truck at her place, and we drove to the Hilton in her car. We arrived early to get ready in our room. While I changed into my tux in the bathroom, Sarah prepared in the main room. When I stepped out, I was floored. She was wearing a stunning, form-fitting blue dress that accentuated her curves perfectly, and her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders. "You look absolutely incredible," I told her, my voice almost a whisper. "I might not even care about this party anymore." She laughed, her cheeks flushing slightly. "Oh no, Ethan, I didn't put all this effort in for nothing," she teased. We headed down to the ballroom, hand in hand. At the party, my boss and his wife greeted us warmly. He introduced Sarah to his wife, but I couldn't help noticing the way his eyes lingered on Sarah a bit too long. As we made our way around the room, I introduced her to people I knew. Everyone seemed to adore her, and she soaked up the compliments with grace. We grabbed drinks and found a table, enjoying the appetizers while waiting for dinner to be served. Sarah spotted a couple of women she recognized from her work in inventory control, and it was clear she felt comfortable mingling with them. Meanwhile, I approached Mary, the head of human resources, and struck up a conversation. "Mary, are there any job openings in inventory control or supply chain?" I asked, thinking of Sarah's recent concerns about working near Mike and Emily. As it turns out, there is an opening. Janice, one of our staff, is retiring next month, and I've been tasked with finding her replacement, Mary said with a smile. "Do you have someone in mind?" "Actually, yes. My date, Sarah, is looking for a new opportunity. She's currently working in inventory control and really enjoys it, but she's ready for a change," I explained. "Have her stop by my office on Monday," Mary said warmly. "I'll schedule an interview for her. And I must say, she's a striking woman." "You're a lucky guy." "Thank you, Mary. I really appreciate this," I replied, grateful for the chance. "I'm sure you do," Mary chuckled before walking off. The rest of the party turned out to be a wonderful evening. I danced with a few of the employees' wives while Sarah shared dances with their husbands. But most of the time, it was just the two of us on the dance floor, enjoying the music and each other's company. The dinner was incredible: roast beef, chicken, shrimp, and all the side dishes you could want. After a couple more drinks, we decided to call it a night and headed up to our room. As I hung up my tuxedo and helped Sarah out of her dress, I paused. "Sarah, are you absolutely sure about this? I don't want you to think I'm pressuring you." "Jack, stop overthinking and just be with me," she replied, smiling softly. We turned off the lights, slid under the covers, and shared an unforgettable night together. As I drifted off, the last thing I heard was her whisper, "I love you, Jack." The next morning, the aroma of fresh coffee woke me up. Sarah had already showered and dressed and was holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Good morning, Jack. Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in a long time," I replied with a grin. After a quick shower, we headed down to the dining room for breakfast. The room was buzzing with familiar faces from the party, all smiling and greeting us warmly. "It seems like we're officially a known couple," I joked to Sarah. On our way out, Mary stopped by our table and smiled at Sarah. "I'll see you Monday," she said casually before leaving. "What was that about?" Sarah asked, puzzled. "Oh, I forgot to tell you," I said with a grin. "You've got an interview with Mary on Monday at Ford. Remember how you mentioned you were thinking of a job change?" Tears welled up in her eyes as she whispered, "Jack, I hope this isn't a dream. I love you so much." On the drive back home, we talked about a trip I had planned. Sarah, in 3 weeks, I'm going to visit my parents in Austin. I'd love for you to come along. I'll be leaving Friday evening and returning Sunday. We could even stop by to see your parents if you'd like. I'd be happy to join you, she said, smiling. But just so you know, my parents are a bit old-fashioned. We probably won't be sharing a bed under their roof. I'm sure we'll figure it out, I replied confidently. When the trip finally came, Sarah mentioned a rumor she'd heard that Mike and Emily were planning to get married soon, likely because Emily was pregnant. I'm sure Emily thinks she's marrying into money, I said, shaking my head. But she'll find out soon enough that it's not Mike who's wealthy. It's his parents. Mike's been living beyond his means for years, mostly on credit. We arrived at my parents' place, a sprawling old farmhouse with plenty of bedrooms and bathrooms. My siblings came out to greet us, followed by my mom and dad. I hugged them all and introduced Sarah, who was welcomed with open arms. Over the next couple of hours, we sat in the living room chatting and catching up. My family adored Sarah, just as I knew they would. At one point, Sarah wandered over to the wall where my mom had hung photos of me and my siblings. She stopped in front of a picture of me in my football uniform, staring at it with tears in her eyes. Sarah, are you okay? What's wrong? I asked, concerned. She turned to me, her voice trembling. Do you remember playing an away game in high school? After the game, you were walking through the tunnel when two guys tried to drag a girl wearing a yellow sweater into the shadows. You stepped in, threw one of them to the ground, and tackled the other. You told them if they ever bothered her again, you'd come back to finish the job, and then you walked off into the locker room. Yeah, I remember that, I said, nodding slowly. But I've never told anyone about it. How do you know about it? Jack, I was that girl, she said, her voice breaking. I never saw your face, just the number 52 on your jersey. I tried to find you afterward, but no one seemed to know who you were. All I could learn was your first name. I waited by the tunnel that day for my friend when those guys grabbed me. They said they wanted to have some fun. Then you showed up. They never bothered me again. She leaned in and kissed me, her eyes filled with gratitude. I think that's why you felt so familiar the first time we met, she said softly. That's the only good thing I can say about Mike. He introduced us. That night, my mom prepared a guest room for Sarah and told me I could sleep in the basement, where there was an extra bed. Around 1 a.m., Sarah snuck downstairs to see me. We shared a quiet, intimate moment together before she returned to her room an hour later. The next day, we visited Sarah's parents. I hadn't realized they were so well off. Their house was gorgeous, and Sarah introduced me to her two younger sisters, who were just as stunning as she was. One of them, Sandy, whispered to Sarah, "Your boyfriend's really handsome." Inside, we sat down and chatted. Her father, Hank, asked me about my job and background, clearly protective of his eldest daughter. After some time, I cleared my throat and said, "Mr. Carter, I'd like to talk to you about marrying your daughter. I'm here to ask for your blessing." Sarah looked at me, wide-eyed and teary, clearly taken by surprise. Even though we haven't been together very long, I continued, our love is strong, and we're ready to build a life together. Hank studied me for a moment before smiling. Jack, I appreciate you coming to me, but you should know, Sarah follows her heart. Sarah, do you love him? Yes, Daddy, she said, her voice firm. With all my heart. Then you have my blessing, under one condition, Hank said. You two must get married here in Austin so your mom and I can give you a proper wedding. And we'll cover all the expenses. I surprised everyone by pulling out an engagement ring from my pocket, getting down on one knee and proposing to Sarah right then and there. She said yes, kissed me, and then hugged her parents, who were both shedding tears of joy. We ended the day with a wonderful family dinner of fried chicken. Back at my parents' place, I assured the Carters that we'd keep them updated on our plans. Life was looking brighter than ever. When we shared the news of our engagement with my parents, they were absolutely overjoyed. My mom hugged Sarah tightly, and my dad clapped me on the shoulder with a proud grin. Word traveled fast through the family, and soon, everyone nearby was invited over for a barbecue to celebrate. My dad took charge of the grill, proudly declaring himself the grill master, while my mom worked her magic in the kitchen, preparing the meat and sides. Sarah, ever eager to help, joined her in the kitchen, and mentioned that she loved cooking. My mom, delighted, welcomed her assistants. As the family trickled in, everyone came by to meet Sarah and offer their congratulations. She was the first woman I'd ever brought home to meet my family, and they didn't hold back their approval. "She's a keeper, Charlie," my Aunt Martha whispered, giving me a wink. "Make sure you treat her right." After a long day of eating, laughing, and catching up, we said goodbye to my relatives, promising to share the wedding date with them soon. Later that evening, as we were getting ready for bed, Sarah confided something amusing. My mom had warned her to watch out for shoes left near the stairs, but she'd accidentally kicked a pair down anyway. When Sarah tried to apologize, my mom just chuckled and told her, "Honey, I was young once too. You've got the kind of energy that leads to a house full of kids, just like me." Later that night, Sarah tiptoed downstairs to join me for a private moment. We try to keep things quiet, but well, you know how that goes. She snuck back upstairs around 5 in the morning, but the knowing smile my mom gave her at breakfast made it clear she hadn't missed a thing. After a hearty country breakfast, we hugged my parents goodbye and made our way back home. On Monday, Sarah had her interview with Mary, the HR director at Ford. By Tuesday, she called me practically bouncing with excitement. "Charlie, I got the job. I can give my 2 weeks' notice today." I already knew, of course, but I acted surprised. That evening, we decided to celebrate at my favorite country bar. Over steak dinners, we talked about how things were finally falling into place. Sarah mentioned that Mike and Emily were on vacation in Las Vegas, getting married. "Honestly, these past 2 weeks have been the best," she said with a laugh. "No Mike, no Emily. I've actually enjoyed being at work." She added that while her co-workers were sad to see her leave, they all understood she was moving on to a better opportunity. "Working at Ford is one of the best jobs around here," she said. "I feel so lucky to have this chance." As for Mike, Sarah couldn't resist leaving one final message before she left. She slipped an anonymous note onto his desk, suggesting he get a DNA test once the baby arrived, considering Emily's frequent lunch dates with her boss. I ended it with a nice little congrats, but I didn't sign it, she said, grinning mischievously. Since starting at Ford, Sarah had been a ray of sunshine. Whenever any of the guys tried to hit on her, she'd proudly show off her engagement ring and make it clear she was taken. Joan, her roommate, was thrilled about our engagement and threw herself into helping Sarah plan the wedding. Joan, who treated Sarah like a daughter, even connected her with a local dressmaker for her wedding gown. Joan's own daughter, now married, would be coming to the wedding as well. It felt like everyone was pitching in to make our day special. Meanwhile, I reached out to my mom, asking for help with the guest list. True to form, she went above and beyond. Not only did she compile a list, but she also bought invitations and took it upon herself to handle the mailing. Sarah's mom, Sophie, was just as proactive. She called to say she'd secured a beautiful church and a spacious reception venue. "We're working with a caterer," Sophie added, "but I'll need a head count soon so we can finalize the details." Hank, her father, had lined up a band, and Sarah's sisters were buzzing with excitement about their roles in the wedding. With all the moving parts coming together, I couldn't help but feel a little overwhelmed. "Do you think we're going overboard?" I asked Sarah one evening. "This is shaping up to be a pretty expensive event." Sarah smiled and took my hand. "Charlie, this is all my parents doing. They've dreamed of giving us girls a grand wedding since we were little. Trust me, my sisters will have the same kind of celebration when their time comes." "Why didn't you tell me your family had money?" I asked, genuinely curious. "I didn't want you to fall for the idea of wealth," she said softly. "I needed to know you loved me for who I am. Only Joan knows about my family's finances. Not even Mike was ever told. Does it change how you feel?" "Not at all," I assured her. "If anything, I'd sign a prenup tomorrow if it made you feel better." "Charlie, there's no need for that," she said, her voice steady. "I believe in us. I believe we're forever." Her words brought a lump to my throat. We might have been planning a big, fancy wedding, but at the heart of it all, it was just about the two of us. And that's all that really mattered. At the time, I didn't have much in terms of wealth, and Sarah knew that. Any inheritance I might receive was still far off, but we were building a future together with love, not money. That's what mattered. Sarah often said, "I'll have a loving husband by my side, and that's all I need." As wedding preparations moved forward, Sarah finalized her lineup. Her father would proudly walk her down the aisle. Her older sister would be the maid of honor, and her younger sister, along with my two married sisters, would serve as bridesmaids. My brothers-in-law joined the lineup as groomsmen, while my two single brothers were paired with Sarah's sisters. My youngest brother was honored to be my best man. To complete the family affair, my adorable niece and nephew were chosen as the flower girl and ring bearer. Everyone was thrilled to play their part, and it warmed my heart to see how everything was coming together. Sarah was thriving in her new role at Ford. Her co-workers admired her work ethic and cheerful personality. She had won them over quickly. But one small issue popped up. With only 5 months on the job, Sarah hadn't accrued enough vacation time to take off for the wedding. We brainstormed a bit and decided that the best option was to leave Friday night, get married on Saturday, and return home Sunday. It was a tight schedule, but we were willing to make it work. Just 3 weeks before the wedding, my plant manager Mark called me into his office. We had a great working relationship, and I knew he was planning to attend the wedding. He got straight to the point. "Charlie, I heard about your wedding schedule," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You're planning to leave Friday, get hitched Saturday, and be back by Sunday, right?" I nodded. "That's the plan, Mark. Sarah doesn't have enough vacation time." "Well," he said with a grin, "tell your lovely bride she's got personal time off starting Thursday and running through all of next week. Oh, and one more thing. I've got 2 tickets here for a 4-day cruise. Consider it a honeymoon gift from us." I was stunned. "Thank you, Mark. This means so much. Sarah is going to be thrilled." After shaking his hand, I couldn't wait to tell Sarah the good news. I called her up and suggested we meet for lunch. Over plates of comfort food, I dropped the surprise. Mark called me into his office. I began, trying to sound casual. "He said they're giving you the time off starting Thursday, all the way through next week. And there's more." I slid the cruise tickets across the table. 4 days. Honeymoon. His gift to us. Sarah's eyes brimmed with tears. "Charlie, this is incredible. I can't believe it. We're so lucky." With her time off secured, our wedding plans became less stressful. We left for Austin on Thursday, and by Friday, we were rehearsing at the church and enjoying a lively rehearsal dinner. I checked in with my dad to see if he needed any extra funds for the event, but he assured me he was all set. "Charlie," he said, "every dollar you've sent since you announced the wedding, I've saved it. This is for you and Sarah." That kind of selflessness made me admire him even more. After dinner, I gave Sarah a kiss goodnight and told her I'd see her at the altar the next day. She had shared the guest list with her mom, but she refused to tell me the final count, saying, "You're already nervous enough, Charlie. Trust me, you'll be surprised." By Saturday morning, I was up early, and my mom insisted I eat a hearty breakfast. "You can't get through the day on an empty stomach," she said, piling my plate high. Over breakfast, my mom shared her thoughts on the Carters. "They're wonderful people," she said. "They think the world of you, Charlie. You're marrying into a great family." After breakfast, I took a long shower, shaved, and slipped into my white tuxedo. My brothers, all in sharp black tuxedos, helped with last-minute details. Together, we headed to the church, which was about 30 miles away in the neighboring county. When we arrived, I couldn't help but marvel at how grand the church was. My brother mentioned it could hold over 700 people, and it was quickly filling up. Guests were arriving by the dozens, and I felt the excitement building. Though my brothers told me to relax, I insisted on helping seat some of the guests. It gave me a chance to greet relatives I hadn't seen in years, as well as friends who had traveled long distances. I even spotted Joan and her daughter, who looked delighted to be part of the celebration. I directed them to sit with Sarah's family. A few of my co-workers surprised me by showing up, including my boss, Mark, who had flown in with his wife. I couldn't have been more grateful for their support. But then, just as I was getting into the groove of things, someone gently tapped my shoulder. "Charlie," my brother whispered. Sarah's limo just pulled up. "You'd better head to the front. Tradition says you're not supposed to see her before the ceremony." I took a deep breath and made my way to my place at the altar. The moment was here. My heart pounded as I waited for Sarah to walk down the aisle. I walked up to chat with my parents for a moment before the ceremony. The soft strains of the organ filled the church as the musician played a couple of hymns. Soon, the announcement came. The guests were asked to take their seats as the wedding was about to begin. Every wedding has its unique charm, and ours was no different. I moved to the front and stood beside the minister, trying to steady my nerves. The processional began with Sandy, one of Sarah's sisters, gracefully walking down the aisle with my younger brother. They made a striking pair, both smiling warmly as they reached the front. Next came Marie, Sarah's other sister, arm in arm with my other single brother. They were followed by my married brothers, each escorting their wives, who were also part of the bridal party. Then came my little nephew, stepping down the aisle as the ring bearer, though I had the actual wedding ring tucked safely in my pocket. Two men rolled out a white runner down the aisle, and my adorable niece followed, scattering rose petals with every step. The music shifted, and the guests stood, turning their heads toward the back of the church. The iconic wedding march began, and there she was, Sarah, radiant as ever, arm in arm with her proud father. She looked breathtaking, almost otherworldly, like an angel walking toward me. I couldn't help it. Tears streamed down my face. "Who gives this woman to this man?" the minister asked. "Her mother and I do," her father replied, his voice steady with pride. The ceremony was beautiful. We exchanged heartfelt vows that left more than a few guests teary-eyed. I slipped the ring onto Sarah's finger, and the minister declared us husband and wife. "You may now kiss the bride," he said with a smile, and I did so gladly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he continued, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Charlie Thompson." The applause and cheers were thunderous as we turned to face the crowd. It was a moment I'll never forget. Afterward, Sarah and I stood by the church doors with our bridal party, thanking each guest as they exited. It took over 30 minutes for everyone to leave, and once the church was clear, we made our way to the reception hall. The hall was buzzing with excitement. Drinks and appetizers were served, and a live band played soft tunes as people mingled. When Sarah and I entered the room, the entire crowd rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. We couldn't stop smiling. We found our seats at the head table, and Sarah's dad, Mr. Carter, gave a short but heartfelt speech welcoming everyone and announcing that dinner was served. The buffet tables were set up on either side of the room to ensure everyone was served quickly. Although Sarah and I were served first, we were the last to finish because every time someone clinked a glass, we stopped to share a kiss. Once dinner was over, tables were moved to make room for dancing. Sarah and I shared the first dance, followed by the wedding party, and then everyone else joined in. The dance floor stayed packed for hours, and the energy in the room was infectious. Some guests even went back for a second helping of food before the night was over. It truly was a magical evening. Epilogue: the honeymoon cruise was a dream come true. We made the right call bringing my truck to the wedding, as we rented a small U-Haul to haul all the thoughtful gifts we received. Back home, we decided it was time to upgrade from my tiny apartment. After a couple of weeks of house hunting, we found a charming 3-bedroom home with a hot tub, a perfect place to start our life together. We left most of our gifts at Joan's house for safekeeping while we settled in. Joan, ever the supportive friend, reassured us she was fine on her own financially. She seemed genuinely happy to see Sarah thriving and in love. Every evening, Sarah and I worked on thank you cards, making sure to express our gratitude to everyone who had shared in our special day. We also made it a habit to have lunch together at work a few times a week. It's a small thing, but it keeps us connected. 4 months into our marriage, everything feels like it's falling into place. We haven't had any major arguments, and when small disagreements arise, we talk them through and find solutions together. Communication truly is the foundation of our relationship. One day, Sarah got a call from an old friend who mentioned that Emily was drowning in debt. The rumor mill suggested that someone had tipped Mike off to get a DNA test once the baby arrived. Sarah later heard that Mike did take the test, and surprise, it confirmed he wasn't the father. Life is a way of working itself out, doesn't it? Thanks for sticking with me through my story. And yes, the part about the country music is absolutely true. I saw it on PBS once. The end.